It's a bright sunny morning in the heart of Milan as I head off to Linate Airport for a flight on British Airways to Heathrow. Linate is now the focus of BA's operation, as it's just a short 20-minute bus ride away to the inner city airport. Now, as soon as I got to the airport, I discovered my flight had been cancelled, and even worse, I was then faced with the horror at check-in of 5 people in the business class queue ahead of me. Once I got to the desk, check-in wanted to put me on a late-night flight out of Milan, which had meant wasting most of the day at the tiny terminal, which admittedly has a fine selection of bars. Instead, I took the morning flight that was heavily delayed and departed almost on my scheduled time. That gave me time to go to the British Airways Milan Linate Lounge. It's had a revamp with new armchairs, a refurnished dining area with a hot buffet, and decorative illuminations by UK-based Tyson Lighting. Alas, it's down in the bowels of the building with no natural light, but offset by the Italian marble flooring and new British-made Boss armchairs. There's a dining area with a fancy coffee machine, croissants and biscuits, and a rather sterile seating area. Next up is a salad bar on the opposite wall, and it's got 6 bowls containing lettuce, tomato, cucumber and sweet corn, but bonus points for the mozzarella cheese balls in brine and the vast collection of sandwiches. There were also Italian cheeses at the back of the fridge and some very nice pastries hidden away at the back of the counter. Hot food itself is oddly in the middle of the lounge behind a wooden divider. At least I could make a good lunch, and there were plenty of sandwiches. Then there were 2 hot tubs with pasta in one and meatballs in the other. Presentation, not BA's strong point today, and soup as well in a strange rotating soup dispenser. Right at the end of the area is a large work table, which is often the busiest part of the lounge, with everybody on a laptop. However, those armchairs, shipped from the UK, are very comfy, and there are plenty of places to sit. Over on the right-hand side of the lounge is the main seating area, and the main bar is at the far end of this. There's a fully stocked self-service bar, and just look at the beers available. You can also mix up your own cocktail from the decidedly odd selection of spirits on the worktop. Also there, red wine on the worktop as well, and white wine is cheekily hidden away in the middle of the fridge. The selection of desserts in the lounge is worthy of note, with a great cheesecake, and most of the UK newspapers are also available on a rack right by the door, just as you leave. In fact, leave I must, because boarding was called, although admittedly 3 hours later we were handed a letter explaining that the late running of the service was due to weather at Heathrow. Although for me, I was actually within 30 minutes of my original departure time. Just a short walk through the terminal to get up to the gate, which was very busy indeed crowded, and then a long bus ride. It took about 5 minutes or so, but gave an excellent tour of the small airport, most of which can actually be seen from the terminal. Only a couple of BA flights in today, one going to London City and one going off to Heathrow. Now, Milan Linate is one of the few airports in Europe to which British Airways flies to all 3 of the airports around the city. Indeed, it used to concentrate most of its flight at the vast Milan Malpensa airport and used to have an old terraces lounge there. However, with the switch to Linate, that means you get a very pleasant bus ride out instead of a walk on board the aircraft. And you get to see everything that's going on in the terminal as well. Finally, the bus staggered out to the British Airways Airbus A319, which was parked next to an Embraer, going into London City in the clear, crisp air of northern Italy. Now, once out of the bus, and then I trotted up the stairs to the aircraft. And once I'd actually made it on board the aircraft at last, which was running about 3 hours late by that point, I was somewhat surprised to find that there were no less than 10 rows of Club Europe. That's pretty much half the aircraft. Now, I would be surprised if everyone was like me and booked it as an ultra cheap option to fly around much of the US, so I could only assume that BA were offering some very cheap business class fares out of Italy, and also they were offering the option to upgrade at check-in. They were asking for prices between 25 and 50 euro, depending on how much you'd paid for your ticket. Now, boarding itself, it was very quick. I settled in my seat for the 2-hour trip to London. Seating itself, well, it's British Airways Classic Club Europe, with the 3 seats turned into 2 and just a flap for the middle seat to hold cocktail glasses. Very important indeed to do that. There was also plenty of time before we took off to watch a neighbouring flight depart to London City. Now, that one left on time. Maybe I should have chosen that flight. Well, anyway, takeoff, it was very brisk from the short runway at Linate and gave an excellent view of the city of Milan, if you could see it through the windows, that is, and also the Alps beyond. The snow was sparkling off those mountains, and it finally felt like we were actually getting back on track with this flight. Now, my experience of British Airways business class service has been just a little bit variable of late. It often seems the crew amble through the aisle and only get to the back of the aircraft when you're on finals over Kent. However, on this flight, the crew were very quick indeed to go around doing the service. Almost as soon as we were into the cruise, in fact, the crew leapt into the action with the bar service. Few on the flight were drinking, so I was quite pleased that within minutes I was able to start off with a red wine. That was a Las Olas Malbec from Argentina, an inky, medium-bodied, dry red wine with strong impressions of dark fruits on the nose and indeed on the palate. The main Italian red on board was the Cittin A from southern Italy. No in-flight entertainment, but at least there was the usual Airbus moving map and some fantastic views out of the window. That red wine, it's a dry, simple table wine, but the 2008 vintage, which is certainly one of the best of the years from that vineyard. So, sunsets, and then the meal service began just as we were heading out over the Alps. It wasn't any of that cheap M&S on board we got. Oh no, not in Club Europe. I was pleasantly surprised to get a full ploughman's lunch along with hot scones, jam and cream. Now, the ploughman's is clearly the favourite on European afternoon tea services. It's got cheddar cheese, cold cuts of ham and salami, half a Scotch egg, tomato and chutney condiments, and it was simply delicious. Also very good indeed, the scones. They were fantastic. Light and crumbly, and the clotted cream just right. Since the cream came from Cornwall, I followed the Cornish tradition by spreading the jam first, followed by the cream. Only entertainment on board, really a copy of High Life, but at least it's a good read for an hour or so. And very quickly indeed, after the meal service, the coast of Kent came into view. That's Dungeness down there, and also Canterbury as well. If you can just about see it, it was pretty much underneath us by that point. So, a pretty average Club Europe flight. However, it was interesting to see how irregular operations were handled by BA. And the answer is, well, not very well, actually. Effectively, what the British Airways computer seems to do is hunt for a flight at some point in the future where there's plenty of capacity. In those cases, it really helps to actively look for solutions that actually suit you as a passenger, as opposed to the check-in person who is just looking to get you out of the way and serve the next one. So rigorously check what the check-in desks decide is in your best interest. Another downside was that my creative routing for the return was instead turned into one direct flight by the computer. Exactly what I didn't want, but I know many passengers would, because it would be much quicker. Because I'd agreed that outbound change, I was deemed by BA to have accepted the return change too. It took many discussions after I landed to get that changed back to my original routing. Anyway, here we are, pretty much descending now and getting down into Heathrow, just as dusk is dusking, and the lights of the Bath Road were glowing in the totally unromantic way that the A4 does. We didn't manage to make up much time, unfortunately. We landed pretty much an hour late at Heathrow, and then there was quite a long taxi as well once we had landed to get to Terminal 5. So, is short-haul business class British Airways Club Europe worth the money? Well, yes, definitely, if you actually pay far less for taking a flight from Europe to connect to a long haul than if you fly direct. Now, normally this isn't the case, and you could expect to pay several £100s for the flight. But for the money, it was a freebie to add on to a long haul that actually made the flight much cheaper. Considering the flight itself brings, well, free drinks, a snack. I can't really consider what was served on board a full 3-course hot meal as advertised by British Airways on the website, but it also includes lounge access as well, and a full service of frequent flyer miles and tier points. And so, in my book, that actually made it worthwhile. And, of course, I made my pint in London.